If you think that the only thing Jim Carroll ever did was the Basketball Diaries, you're missing out on one of the greatest albums that no one ever talks about. And honestly, I can't figure out why. Every music fan has one of those albums that they just won't shut up about. One of my favorites is Catholic Boy by Jim Carroll, released in 1980. It's one of those records that makes you stop and think, how did this not become a bigger deal? It's punk, it's poetry, it's funny, heartbreaking, angry, and surprisingly beautiful. And if you've never heard it from beginning to end, you're in for something special. I've always thought Jim Carroll was an oddball in the best possible way. Most people become musicians and then write a memoir when they're in their 60s. Jim Carroll did the opposite. Before he ever fronted a band, he was a well-respected poet. Then he wrote The Basketball Diaries, a brutally honest memoir about growing up in New York, playing basketball, getting hooked on heroin, and somehow surviving long enough to write about it. He started writing these diaries when he was 12 years old. The thing is, when Jim Carroll started being a musician, he didn't stop being a writer. That's what makes Catholic Boy so different. This isn't somebody trying to look dangerous. He was dangerous. He had already lived through things that many of us would never want to. You believe every word he wrote because he actually lived those words. By 1980, New York was this incredible mix of creativity and chaos. CBGB in the Bowery had become ground zero for punk. The Ramones kicked the door open. Television changed what guitars could sound like. Patti Smith had already proven that poetry and music could work together. Jim Carroll walked into that world carrying a notebook. The title track, Catholic Boy, tells you right away that this isn't going to be a collection of hymns. It's about guilt, faith, temptation, trying to figure out who you are while carrying around all the baggage that someone else packed for you. If you grew up Catholic, you'll probably laugh a little bit and then you'll get uncomfortable. That's kind of how this whole album works. It keeps pulling the rug out from under you. One minute, the band's charging away like a runaway freight train. The next minute, Jim drops a line that makes you think, wait, did he say that? He did, and he meant it. There's this nervous energy running through the whole album. Everyone's had way too much coffee or speed and maybe a mild existential crisis. One thing I really appreciate is that Jim Carroll never glamorizes the darkness. He writes about addiction, death, fear, loneliness, but he never makes any of it seem cool. He makes it look real. He tells it like it is. And that's a huge difference. That's probably why these songs still hit hard more than 40 years later. They're honest, and honesty never goes out of style. There's a song called Three Sisters, and this song reminds you that Jim Carroll wasn't always just angry. Sometimes he could be very tender. That's something people miss when all they've ever heard is People Who Died, the big track off this album. They think he's all sharp edges, but he's not. There's real compassion running underneath these songs. You can hear someone trying to make sense of a world that doesn't make sense. That's something I've noticed about my favorite albums. They don't give you answers. They just make you feel a little less weird for asking the questions. The production of the album helps too. Nothing's polished within an inch of its life. You can hear the grit, the guitars bite, and they sound like actual human beings are playing them. It feels like musicians making music that actually feels alive. By the time day and night rolls around, the mood shifts again. It's restless, lonely, like walking around Manhattan at 2 in the morning, wondering where everyone else is going. Jim Carroll had this gift for turning ordinary city life into something cinematic. He could describe a street corner and somehow make it seem like it was the most important place on the face of the earth. That's the poet showing up again. But there was a problem. Back in 1980s, record companies didn't know what to do with someone like Jim Carroll. Was he a punk rocker? Was he a poet? A writer? An intellectual? The answer was yes, he's all of those, which isn't exactly a great marketing strategy. But then one song came along that changed everything. That song was People Who Died. Now, here's the funny thing. If you ask someone about Jim Carroll, they'll either say, oh, the Basketball Diaries, or, yeah, I've heard People Who Died. But People Who Died is one of the most misunderstood songs in rock. On the surface, it sounds almost joyful. It's loud and fast and has a chorus that gets stuck in your head for days. But if you listen to the lyrics, Jim is naming friend after friend after friend, people he knew and loved, people who never got the chance to grow old. Some overdosed, some were murdered, one had leukemia, some died in accidents, and some just had terrible luck. But there's no fake drama here. This wasn't fiction. This was Jim taking attendance in his life and realizing that half the room was already gone. That's what makes the song so powerful. He never asked you to feel sorry for him. He just tells the truth. Now, of all people, Keith Richards sang backup on this track, which might be the most Keith Richards thing ever. Here's a man that survived every bad decision that a rock and roller could make, singing on a song about people who weren't so lucky as him. The strange thing is that People Who Died became so famous that it almost hid the rest of the album. And that's a shame, because Catholic Boy isn't just one song surrounded by filler. It's one great song surrounded by several great songs. And as I've gotten older, I've noticed that this album hits differently. When I first heard it, I loved the energy, but now I hear the sadness. I hear someone trying to make sense of loss before he was even 30 years old when he recorded this. And maybe that's why it still feels so current. We're all carrying around people that we wish were still here. Jim Carroll just had the courage to write about it. That's really what makes Catholic Boy different from so many other punk records. Most punk albums want to change the world. Jim Carroll was trying to understand it, and those things aren't the same. Eddie Vedder from Pearl Jam has praised Jim Carroll's writing, and you can hear that same emotional honesty running through Pearl Jam's best songs. Even artists who sound nothing like Jim Carroll owe him something. He helped prove that rock lyrics could read like great short stories, that they didn't have to be simple, Moon, June, Spoon, or safe, or predictable. And honestly, I wish more people still wrote songs like this. These days, it feels like every lyric has been focus grouped into submission. Jim Carroll wrote like someone who didn't care whether you liked him or not. He cared whether you believed him. That's a big difference. Maybe that's why Catholic Boy has aged so well. It never chased a trend or tried to be fashionable. It just told the truth. Truth has a funny habit of surviving longer than hype. So why has this album been forgotten? Partly because 1980, when it came out, was ridiculously competitive. You had London Calling by The Clash making waves. Post-punk was everywhere. New Wave was starting to take over. There were simply too many incredible albums fighting for attention that year. Then the Basketball Diaries became Jim Carroll's calling card. Ironically, the success of that book and later the Leonardo DiCaprio movie meant that a lot of people knew Jim Carroll, the writer, without ever discovering Jim Carroll, the songwriter. And that's our loss, because this album deserves to sit on the same shelf as the great punk and post-punk records of its era. Because every time I listen to it, I hear something I've missed before. And those are the albums worth keeping. Catholic Boy is one of those companions. It's raw, funny, heartbreaking. It's loud enough to rattle your windows and smart enough to rattle your conscience. Not many albums can do both. If you've never heard it, put on a pair of headphones and give yourself a treat. I honestly think you'll wonder why this album stayed hidden for so long. Catholic Boy isn't just a forgotten punk album. It's proof that poetry and music can live in the same space without either one losing its edge. Jim Carroll gave us a record that's fearless, painfully honest, and every bit as powerful now as it was in 1980. For me, it's not just an overlooked classic. It's one of the essential albums of the post-punk era. Have you heard any music by Jim Carroll before? You may have heard People Who Died, because that was everywhere and it's been in loads of different movies. Leave in the comments if you're familiar with him, either by his writing or his music. If you enjoy my content, please consider liking and subscribing. I will see you in the next one.